Hi, it's Steph, and we're at Lowe's, and they are fully stocked for fall planting. They have mums, perennials, trees, and shrubs, and even a Labor Day sale. So let's go ahead and take a look at the end of August inventory at Lowe's. If it got too hot this summer to do some planting, fall is the next best time. The soil is still warm, so your plants have time to establish some roots before it gets cold and the ground freezes. There's naturally more moisture. There's also less pest and disease pressure, and it's just more comfortable to plant in the cooler temperatures. And these beautiful coneflowers, which are one of my favorite perennials, are on sale. The 1.5 gallon size are normally $15.98, and they're on a deal for Labor Day for $12.98. And this is the Cheyenne Spirit, which is a really beautiful variety because you get multiple colors on one plant. Shades of oranges and coral pink, reds, yellows, and even cream. Look at this beautiful golden yellow. The bees are all over it, so pollinators love coneflowers. And even when they're done blooming, you can leave these large heads up, and the goldfinches love to snack on their seeds. And they provide winter interest, so a lot of good reasons to grow coneflowers. They are deer resistant, but sometimes the rabbits will snack on the ones on the buds that they can reach down low. But a really easy plant to grow in full sun, but with a well-draining soil. They will not tolerate sitting in moisture. They will actually rot at the root or at the crown, and you'll lose your plant. So make sure that your soil is well-draining. So the Cheyenne Spirit coneflower gets to be 24 to 36 inches in height, 18 to 24 inches in width, and hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. So $12.98 is a great price for these. Here's another really pretty variety of coneflower. This one is called Feelin' Pink, and it is primarily pink. Looks very similar to the native variety of Echinacea purpurea, and really pretty. Look at that, large blooms. These look gorgeous paired along things like Russian sage because they have the same growing conditions. They want a well-drained soil and full sun. The Feelin' Pink coneflower also hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height and 12 to 16 inches in width. So it's a bit more narrow than the Cheyenne Spirit. And these again are on the Labor Day sale for $12.98 for their 1.5 gallon container. And another quintessential late season garden perennial, the Rudbeckia, also known as Black-Eyed Susan. But this variety doesn't have a brown or black eye, it has a green eye. It is the Prairie Sun Rudbeckia. And I actually grew this variety this year using the winter sowing method. I did get 2 plants. Currently it's still foliage. I'm hoping I still get some blooms out of it this season, but time will tell. And this is perennial. I'm in a zone 6B 7A. So let me know in this zone if you've grown the Prairie Sun Rudbeckia and if it's returned well for you each year. I was under the impression that this was only a half hardy annual, meaning if your temperatures in winter were mild, that it would return for you, and it also reseeds some so that you will continue to get some seedlings and plants down the road. But let me know what your experience has been. So the Prairie Sun Rudbeckia is hardy down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets to be 20 to 24 inches in height, 12 to 15 inches in width. It wants full sun and a well-draining soil, but it's a really beautiful and interesting variety. They also have lots of Rudbeckia, the traditional variety, in stock. This is called Deems Rudbeckia. It's a type of Fulgida, which is like the Goldstrom variety that I actually grow in my own garden. They're pretty sturdy, anywhere from 2 to 3 feet in height. They love full sun and a well-draining soil. They're also great self-seeders. So not only do they spread by runners, they also spread by dropping seed. So if you want your plants to self-seed at the end of the season, just leave some of the dried bloom heads up. So you can see here, these are spent blooms. They start to dry and eventually they look like this. This is when they start forming seed. If you have exposed soil at the bottom of your plant, when those seeds drop, they'll have some soil to germinate in. But if you have thick mulch and you want plants to self-seed, you might want to just pull back some of that mulch underneath the plant that you want to get more of. But this is another really great perennial. Easy care. The deer and rabbit leave it alone in my garden, and it just has a really pretty golden color that also looks great with things like Russian sage and even agastache at this point in the season. The Deems Rudbeckia is hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. In general, Rudbeckia is a very hardy perennial, the traditional varieties, and it gets to be 24 to 36 inches in height, 12 to 24 inches in width. Astilbe, a wonderful bloomer if you have a part shade to shade garden, but they are a gorgeous perennial, deer and rabbit resistant. They do like quite a bit of moisture though, so if you are going to plant them, you want to make sure that you have them in a moist but well draining spot. They don't want to sit in puddles of water, but they do like a consistent moisture. They also like part sun, like I said, or shade. So if you give them sun, it's got to be a morning sun, about 3 to 4 hours of morning sun, because it is softer than an harsh afternoon sun, which would scold the leaves and then they won't be as happy. But a really pretty perennial. These are just past their prime now, so even when they're done blooming, these plumes provide a lot of visual interest in the garden. Now this variety is also in one of their 1.5 gallon containers, so it would be $12.98, and you can easily divide this. I divide Astilbe all the time. I actually just did it this season. You could probably get 2, maybe even 3 smaller plants out of this, but each season, if it's happy, it'll get larger and larger, and these are on sale for $12.98 for the 1.5 gallon containers and the colored pots here at Lowe's. This is a variety of Visions Astilbe, which blooms a little later in the season than some of the other varieties of Astilbe, and it is hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets to be 12 to 18 inches in height, 12 to 18 inches in width. And if you love the Shasta daisy earlier in the season, then you might like the Montauk daisy, which blooms in fall. Now these of course are in bloom because they came from a greenhouse somewhere, so they're a little ahead of the season. But in most areas here in my zone 6B7A, they're currently just starting to form their buds and will bloom probably in mid to late September. But they have the classic daisy white bloom. The foliage is a little bit thicker, I feel, than the traditional daisies. They also have a scent to them, and they can be a floppy plant. So the key with growing the Montauk daisy is that you want to give them what they call the Chelsea chop. At some point between Memorial Day and the 4th of July, you want to cut down the plant by about a half or so, maybe even down to a third. And what that will do is it will push out more growth, but it'll keep the plant more compact and bushy, and then it will still form buds and bloom for you in fall. But it's a great way to keep these plants from, one, getting woody, because they do have a tendency to do that, but also to keep them nice and bushy instead of flopping all over the ground, so that your blooms aren't laying on the ground and you get to enjoy them nice and upright. But this variety here is, like I said, the Montauk daisy. It is $10.98 in the Lowe's house brand container. They want full sun, and it says summer through fall, so very late summer, probably mid to late September, and maybe even into fall in some areas. And it is hardy down to zone 5 or -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and they get to be 24 to 36 inches in height, 18 to 24 inches wide. These actually get quite large, as big as a shrub, so I would say average size is more like 3 to 4 feet in width and maybe about 3 feet in height. Another excellent fall blooming perennial is the Aster, and I absolutely love these. I would prefer buying these to use in a container in place of mums, because then I can plant them out in my landscape, which is exactly what I did last year, and I have one of these coming back beautifully. I will say the bunnies like to munch on them, so I have had to spray them with a deer and rabbit repellent just so that I get to enjoy the blooms, but I'm really happy that it returned, as it is perennial. But I have had Asters that didn't return in the past, so that's why I'm saying that. So the Magic Aster variety is a mounting perennial. It blooms late summer through fall, $7.98 for these containers here at Lowe's. And size-wise, it is mounting, so it stays relatively well-behaved at 18 to 24 inches in height, 18 to 24 inches in width. And it is only hardy to a zone 6 or 0 degrees Fahrenheit, so if you have an exceptionally cold winter, or maybe even a very wet winter, it's possible they won't return for you, which is why I'm pretty excited that mine did return. But a really pretty, kind of mum-like looking bloom if you look at it up close in the shade of purple. They also have some that come in a shade of pink, so let me show you that. There's one down here that is pink, but a very pretty perennial for some late season color. And speaking of mums, they have a Labor Day sale on the mums, 2 for $8 for their 3-quart mums. Now, it is only the end of August, so here are my couple of tips on purchasing mums this early. It is great because you get to take advantage of the sale, but my recommendation would be to buy them in a pretty tightly budded form. That way you get to enjoy them for longer. They also like quite a bit of moisture, and these containers dry out quite fast. So what you can do is take them and plant them into a larger planter with more soil, which will retain more moisture. If you do keep these in the container, you want to bottom water them. So sit them in a tray or a bucket of low water and let them sop up the water from the bottom. That way they can get more evenly watered and they'll be a lot happier. If you water them from above, sometimes they get kind of like an opening, sort of like when it rains, and then they look kind of unsightly because you want them to grow in a nice mound. So sometimes when people plant these in containers, say on a porch, if they get pummeled by the rain, they can start to splay in the middle and not look as nice. So it's always recommended to put them sort of in a more protected space so that they won't get that direct overhead rain. But this is the stage that I would buy them in, nicely budded just like that. But these look really nice and such a great price. 2 for $8 on this Labor Day sale. They have the golden yellow, they have that really pretty kind of magenta pink, and I've also seen some of the light pink and white varieties, and they have tons of them. And they also have croton, which is a tropical plant that looks really beautiful alongside your mums in your fall displays outdoors, but it is not cold tolerant. So as soon as you get a frost, these will die. But you can bring them inside and treat them like a house plant. But it's interesting because they come in all of these beautiful fall colors. And these are in a decorative planter for $22.98, but they usually carry quite a few different sizes and price points on the croton. And here are the quart size mums at 5 for $5. Now this is a great size to tuck into other containers. So say you have some annuals that have gotten tired and you want to swap them out for some fall annuals, this is your chance. You just pop those out, pop a few of these in, and you've updated your display for fall. And it's a really great price at just $1 a piece. They have that magenta pink, they have an orange, as well as this red and even the golden yellow. They also have this gorgeous light pink. It's almost like opalescent. I really love this color, mum, in the quart size containers. And here are some smaller croton containers in these decorative containers for $15.98, and they have them in these plaid patterns, as well as some orange and even a black one with some pumpkins on the front. And red hot poker, another excellent perennial for the garden. Not only does it have these really beautiful spike type blooms, even when it's not in bloom, it has this tuft of grassy foliage that makes it look like an ornamental grass. So a really interesting perennial that the pollinators love. So not only do the bees love them, so do the hummingbirds, because they have these tubular shaped blooms that they can get right up in there. And they also have this really pretty kind of gradient color effect. Now this variety starts off a creamy color and then it fades to this almost coral orange color. Just really pretty. I also find them to bloom for maybe about 3 to 4 weeks because they start to send up additional bloom spikes after their initial flush. So I find that they bloom maybe a little bit longer than some other perennials. Definitely longer than my Stokesia Aster I found this year, but really pretty garden perennial for that vertical interest. And they're in the Lowe's 1.5 gallon colored pots, which means they're $12.98 on sale. So the red hot poker, it doesn't give us a specific variety, but it is an upright perennial for full sun, and it gets to be 3 to 4 feet in height, 2 to 3 feet in width, hardy down to a zone 5 or -10 degrees Fahrenheit. And they are deer resistant. I can vouch for that. They do not touch them in my garden. And if you want to add texture and movement to your borders, perennial grasses are a great way to do that. Now they also happen to be on sale as part of Lowe's deals for Labor Day at $12.98 for the 1.5 gallon size. And these look to be taller varieties. Now these are starting to already send up their blooms, and with ornamental grasses that can vary from these loose seed heads like this variety has to some of the plumes like the shorter fountain grasses have that look like stalks of wheat. But some really interesting varieties out there. This one happens to be called Sapphire Fountain Grass, and it looks like it might have a blue hue to it. It's an ornamental grass. And let's see the size on that, because that's what I'm most concerned about when it comes to ornamental grasses. Now it says 12 to 24 inch average height, 12 to 24 inch width. I can tell you right now by looking at it, that is not the case. So it's either labeled wrong or the sizing is wrong, because these look to be the Cheyenne Sky, I believe it's called, with a little bit of the red coloration and these looser seed heads. So sometimes that is the caveat. You should be careful about the varieties that you're looking at. If the tag doesn't look correct, snap a picture of it, do a Google Lens search, and see what turns up. But this looks to me like it could be a variety that gets anywhere from 2 to 3 feet in height and maybe 2 to 3 feet in width. But nonetheless, ornamental grass is a great option for your late season garden. Okay, I was suspect that they were mislabeled, and they were. They're actually the Shenandoah switchgrass. I was thinking Cheyenne Sky because the Cheyenne Sky does have some of these red blades, but so does the Shenandoah. And it is another ornamental grass perennial for full sun. And this variety does in fact get to be, it says here, 3 feet in height, 2 feet in width, hardy down to a zone 4 or negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you have ornamental grasses growing in your garden and you find that it's starting to get a hollow hole in the center, that is your sign that it's time to dig up and divide that grass. Cut out that center that is hollow and then plant out the other sections that still have grass on them, and that is how you rejuvenate your ornamental grasses. Fall is a good time to do it, but I feel like with ornamental grasses, spring is even a better time to dig them up and take care of that process. And if you're looking to add some privacy to your garden or to put a living fence up, they have a deal on some evergreens. This is the emerald green arborvitae in a 1.5 gallon container at 2 for $30. The regular price is $22.98, so at $15 a piece, that's a great buy. I will tell you that this variety is not as deer resistant as the green giant. So if you deal with deer, then maybe stay away from the emerald green. The benefit of this one is that it is more compact. It has more of a columnar, compact growth habit versus the green giant, which can get pretty large. But both varieties are going to want good, consistent moisture, especially when they're newly planted. And the fall is a great time to take on a project like this because not only do you find evergreens on sale, sometimes even on clearance, but the cooler temperatures and the naturally more moist, like rainfall that you get in fall, is going to help keep those plants hydrated and get them establishing some roots. So emerald green arborvitae, I'll give you the size on these. They generally get about 15 feet in height, 4 feet in width, also make a beautiful green backdrop to your other plants. And they're hardy to a zone 3 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I do have a video that I made on my channel about the key differences between those plants as well as spacing and real life examples of what they look like both in my neighbor's yard and in my parents' yard. One of each variety, the emerald green and the green giant, and I will link that below for you to check out. They also have a deal on some evergreen shrubs. So they have some azaleas at 2 for $30, so $15 a piece. If you want to plant some so that you get some beautiful blooms next spring, this is a good time to pick them up at a great price. They also have some buddleia or butterfly bush on sale, also $15.98 on a special buy. It's possible that they're also 2 for $30, but this is called the nano purple. And these get pretty large, so you want to give them some space. Also, some varieties, the older varieties, the Davidi, I believe, is the type that will sometimes drop seed, and they can become a little bit of a garden thug, but very pretty. Pollinators love them, and I also find the blooms to have a nice fragrance. To me, they almost smell like lilac. And this variety, the Neho Purple, looks like it needs 6 foot spacing, 8 foot in height, 6 feet in width, which is an average size for most butterfly bushes. Hardy to a zone 5 or down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. They want to be grown in full sun and in a very well-draining soil. And check out this gorgeous and colorful shrub. This is Leucothoe, and the variety is called Rainbow. And I actually planted this in my garden a couple of seasons ago. I loved this variegated foliage and this pink color it gets on the new growth. And I'm sad to report that it did not return for me. And I think a part of the reason was that I planted it under some old oak trees. There was too much root competition and they weren't getting enough moisture. So while I do think that these benefit from a part shade location, otherwise the leaves can scorch like you see right here if they get too much sun, I think they also like a pretty consistent moisture. So if you plant them somewhere, based on my experience, I would say a part shade location, maybe a few hours of morning sun and afternoon shade, and a good moist, consistently moist but well draining soil, and they will do great because it's such a beautiful shrub. So here are the specs on the Monrovia Rainbow Drooping Leucothoe, and it's a part sun shrub, dramatic foliage, multi-season beauty. These are $60.98, a little pricey, but they are really pretty. In general, Monrovia plants are premium, so the price point will be a little higher than the Lowe's house brand containers. And this has an average growth size of 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. It can be pruned or clipped down to 2 feet tall and wide, and it's hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And some more gorgeous late season blooming shrubs. These are Rose of Sharon, also known as hibiscus shrubs. And look at this beautiful purple coloration and this roughly double bloom. Now, sometimes on the Rose of Sharon, they'll look more like a hibiscus where it's a single petal with the center that has that kind of pollen stamen there. But these are very fluffy. This is called the French Cabaret Purple Hibiscus, and it's by First Editions. It's a full sun shrub, green foliage, has medium water needs, and it is hardy in zones 5 through 9. It gets to be 5 to 8 feet in height, 4 to 7 feet in width. And these containers here, a 2-gallon container for $27.98. This is what I meant about the single petal with the center there. This one is called the Purple Pillar, and it's by Proven Winners. Also very pretty and tropical looking. A lot easier for our pollinator friends to get in there. In fact, that one just landed for a snack. So pretty. So it has this kind of light lavender pink coloration with a red center. And here are the specs on the Purple Pillar, Rose of Sharon by Proven Winners. It gets to be 10 to 16 feet in height. So pillar means it is more narrow, a columnar in shape. So 10 to 16 in height, 2 to 3 feet in width. Hardy in USDA growing zones 5 through 9 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wants to be planted in sun. Has a very narrow growth habit. It's heat tolerant and beautiful late summer interest. And these containers here are a number 2-gallon for $29.98. And here is another really pretty Rose of Sharon or hibiscus by First Editions. This one has kind of a light pink white fluffy bloom. The bloom actually looks very similar to my sugar tip Rose of Sharon by Proven Winners, except that the sugar tip has variegated foliage, which adds another level of interest. But this one also has a beautiful bloom. Look at that. Yeah, actually super similar to the sugar tip Rose of Sharon bloom. This variety is called the French Cabaret Blush. It's hardy in zones 5 through 8. Also gets to be 5 to 8 feet in height, 4 to 7 feet in width. Very pretty. In a 2-gallon container for $27.98. And if you like the look of a 9-bark that is a native shrub, has appealing bark and beautiful blooms in spring, but you don't have the size for a full-sized 9-bark, here is a great option. This is the Little Devil 9-bark by First Editions, and this one is more compact. So it's hardy in USDA growing zones 3 through 7. It gets creamy white blooms in the spring, has this beautiful dark foliage. It is deer resistant. I can vouch for that. They do not touch my 9-bark in my garden. At least my, I have a tiny wine by Proven Winners. They don't touch that one. They have touched my ginger wine a little bit. And this one here is $27.98 for the 2-gallon container, and it only gets to be 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, and it wants full sun. So great little shrub to add some color contrast in your beds with this dark foliage. And some beautiful heather. This actually from afar could look like the Magic Show White Wands Veronica, which I actually planted some of those this season in my garden. But this is an evergreen that gets late season blooms. Now it is currently in bloom, so let's take a look at the bloom season for this one. So this one does say that it blooms in spring and summer. In general, most heather varieties will bloom in the very late winter, very early spring. So it's excellent because you get some color out there when not much else is blooming. Maybe some hellebore. This would be great to plant alongside some hellebore. But this is called the Venus Heather. It has a white coloration, a $25.98 for this variety. It wants full sun and pretty compact at only 24 inches in height and needing 24 to 36 inch spacing. It is hardy down to a zone of 4 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and these are $25.98. So they have this white variety, and right in the back I just spotted a pink variety. Look how gorgeous that is. So pretty. And the pink one, let's see if it has a different name. Oh, it's called Scarlet Scotch Heather. It also has a summer and fall bloom time, $25.98. This one is listed as wanting part sun, where the Venus Heather wanted full sun. And let's see how big it gets. Same size, 24 inches in height, 24 to 36 inch width, hardy to a zone 5 or down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Very pretty plants that are evergreen, and they actually feel like evergreens if you touch them. They have a soft kind of ferny texture. And look at these gorgeous hibiscus. Now this looks very much like my Proven Winners Perfect Storm hibiscus, but this is in a Lowe's house brand container. Same coloration, this very light pink with a red eye, very tropical looking, and these are late season bloomers. Here in my zone 6B, 7A, they bloom for me in August, mid to late August, which is excellent because at that point, most of our garden perennials are starting to get tired. And this here also has a really dark foliage, which provides another level of interest. And this is a perennial that gets as large as a shrub, so you technically only need one unless you want to plant a large drift of them. This one is called the Starry Night Hibiscus in the Lowe's container for $19.98. Most varieties get 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. This one does too. It says 4 to 5 feet in height, 2 to 4 feet in width, hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit or zone 5. Now, if you plant this right now and next spring you're worried that it didn't make it through the winter, just wait. I find that they're pretty late to break dormancy in spring. For me, they don't emerge until mid to late May, but a really pretty one for some late season color. And one last tip about growing hibiscus is that they love moisture. So if you have an area in your garden that maybe tends to hold on to moisture a little bit longer, this would be a great perennial to try there. Well, that brings us to the end of the late August and Labor Day inventory here at Lowe's. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my store has in stock, and I hope that you can find some of these varieties in sales near you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.